Sargi Gepu, the news grandfather. When I think back to my childhood in Amdongawa during the late 1980s and early 1990s, the first image that always comes to my mind is of him, the old man with red, sunburned shoulders and a sheepskin coat hanging loosely around his body. He never wore a shirt no matter how strong the wind blew across the grasslands. His skin was rough and dark from years under the highland sun, but his eyes were bright, full of life and stubborn warmth. We all called him Sargi Gepu, which means news grandfather. He wasn't related to me by blood, but in the way of our small community, everyone felt close to him. He always carried a small radio tape recorder, old, scratched, its buttons nearly falling apart. He treated that little radio as if it were a sacred treasure. Every afternoon when the air grew quiet and the yaks began to settle, he would sit on a flat stone outside his home, squinting into the distance, slowly turning the dial, searching for a voice beyond the mountains. Sometimes when the wind was just right, he caught Radio Free Asia. The sound was faint and scattered with static, but the moment he heard Tibetan words, he leaned closer, holding his breath. If he was lucky, he would catch news about Tibetans in exile or about His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Back then, under the tight control of the Chinese Communist regime, listening to such broadcasts was dangerous. People were careful with their words, always afraid of being watched. But Sargi Gepu didn't care. He was old enough to have seen too much already, and maybe that gave him a kind of quiet courage. He listened alone, always alone, but what he heard never stayed with him. The next day, he would walk through the village, his radio hanging from his shoulder, and quietly share what he'd learned. He told us about Tibetan children studying in India, about monasteries being rebuilt, about His Holiness teaching compassion and peace to the world. His words spread from house to house, from ear to ear, and with them came warmth and light. In those dark times when even hope was something people feared to speak of, his news became a kind of fire that kept our hearts alive. I was very young then, but I remember how people's faces changed after talking to him. Their eyes seemed a little brighter, their voices a little stronger. What he brought us was not just information, it was courage, and the belief that Tibet still lived beyond the mountains. Sometimes I wonder what he must have felt, sitting there with his broken radio, knowing the risk yet refusing to be silent. Maybe he didn't see himself as brave. Maybe he simply believed that truth once heard must continue to be told. People like Sargi Gepu never made speeches, never carried banners, and never stood on stages. But it was through the quiet strength of such little people that the Tibetan struggle endured. Their faith, their persistence, and their whispers of truth kept alive a light that could not be extinguished. Even now, when I hear the crackling hum of a radio,